welcome, my friends. This encounter happened 13 years ago. At the time I was 14. My then best friend lived just down the street from me. My cousin was dating her older brother, so I spent basically every day at her place. She lived on the 5th floor of a block of flats. It had 18 floors, so more often than not, I'd just get the elevator. On this particular day, I was waiting on the elevator. It was taking a while. Not so unusual. As I said, this building had 18 floors, so sometimes you had to wait a while if other people were using it. While I was waiting, a man entered the building and stood beside me waiting on the elevator as well. This wasn't odd, but something about this guy had me very unnerved. I can't say what about him made me uneasy, looking back, as he seemed just like a normal guy. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, with short dark hair, medium height and build, short beard and dressed well enough, but something about him just seemed off. I could feel his eyes on me as I continued to wait for the elevator. I'm a girl and I've always been small and looked younger than I was. Back then I was lucky if I was even 5 feet and looked about 11 or 12. I've had stranger danger, and I know how dangerous people can be drilled into my head since I was little, and while it seemed silly to be this terrified of a random man, just waiting at an elevator, same as me, I decided to listen to my instincts. It was the best decision I have ever made. I casually walked to the stairwell, which is around the corner from the elevator. I walked in, and the second I'm out of sight, the door closed. I began to run up the stairs as fast as I could. Now back then I was fairly athletic. I did a lot of sports in my free time, so it didn't wind me too bad to run up the stairs. About halfway up I hear the stairwell door slam open, and footsteps running up the stairs. I paused for a second, terrified. I looked down the stairwell, seeing the face of the guy staring up at me from 2 floors below. He began to run up the stairs after me. I ran as fast as I could up the remaining floors, my legs burning from how fast I was running, barely able to catch a breath in my lungs. I finally get to my friend's floor and exit the stairwell. I make it to her door and begin to pound on the door, crying and begging her to let me in. She opens the door confused, and I run inside, slamming the door behind me. So there I am, crying and shaking as she gets the story out of me. Her older brother, who was a 20-year-old guy and built really big, heard all of this. He came out of his room to find out what the commotion was. He charged out the flat and began to hunt the building for the man, but he couldn't find a single trace of him. I never saw the man from the elevator again. I don't know what he wanted from me, or what he planned to do if he caught me, and I'm glad I never found out. I grew up just north of New York City, living in a pretty densely populated metro area. I always looked forward to the summer when my father and I went backpacking upstate. We had a spot about an hour north of Lake George in the Adirondacks and camped a few nights every summer. One trip, a few years back now, we were driving to the trailhead. On a long, narrow dirt road, we saw a car pulled over with a few people arguing outside of it. This isn't the most secluded spot in the world, so it's not uncommon to see another family. But it was weird that a car would be pulled over here, with no real access to any trails. As we drove closer, a man walked over and waved at us. We assumed they were having car trouble. My father rolled down his window. Suddenly, a female in the group screamed, "Get away from him!" The man suddenly had a serious face and began sprinting towards us. He was tall and well-built and moving quickly. My father slammed on his brakes and quickly pulled the car into reverse. The man stopped and let out a sigh. We just sat there, parked, confused. The man reached towards us. I would say we were a good 10 or so yards away. Then he darted off the road into the woods. Cautiously at this point, we drove slowly to the parked car. There were 3 women crying. They were his sisters, and apparently he had just returned home from the army a few months prior. According to the women, shortly after he got back, he began acting odd and was diagnosed with PTSD, as well as early onset Alzheimer's disease. The women got back in their car and headed for town. They said they were going to the ranger station to get help locating him. The rest of the day was fairly uneventful. We hiked to our campsite, fished for a while, and set up camp for the night. Sitting next to the fire, my father and I felt some strange vibes. We weren't sure whether the women were telling the truth, or if the man was trying to ask for our help. And what was more disturbing was the fact that we were camping only a few miles away from where this man had ran off. We weren't sure if he was violent, armed, or if he had followed us to our campsite. Typically, my father and I sleep in separate bivy tents, but we decided to stay in the shelter that night. It was basically a small log cabin with 3 walls and an open front, where the fire pit was located. Neither of us slept too much that night. It probably just was my imagination, but I swear I felt like I was being watched, though my father and I didn't hear footsteps or anything out of the ordinary. The next morning, I left camp to take a leak. A few hundred feet away from our camp, I saw a small fire pit right on the trail. I placed my hands on the ashes. They were soaked. Someone had a fire here very recently and poured water on it. We had food and supply for 4 nights, but after I found that fire pit, we broke camp and left that morning. I'll try to keep this story brief. Back in October of last year, I'd experienced something that I found creepy and unsettling. My wife had left town for a couple weeks, so I was alone during that time. We lived in a decent neighborhood, but Phoenix is kind of weird in that you can be in a really nice neighborhood. Then if you travel a couple streets down, you'd be in a not-so-great neighborhood. Our house was right on the edge of a good and bad area. Our place was kind of tucked back at the base of a mountain, out of sight, out of mind. Our street didn't have any streetlights at that point, so it was always dark at night. One day I was sitting up in my room on the 2nd floor, and the doorbell kept ringing like crazy. Maybe in 1-second intervals, something rapid fire. This went on for about 10 to 15 minutes straight. This was very unsettling for it to go on that long, but it was daylight out, and for some reason things aren't as scary. I honestly didn't know what to do at this kind of situation. I peeked out of my curtains to see if I could see the people. My room is right above the front door. I was careful not to move the curtains too much, because I didn't want them to see me peeking out. I saw a man and a woman I didn't recognize, dressed wearing loose, ratty clothes. There's no reason for these strange people to be aggressively ringing my doorbell non-stop for so long. I didn't know what to do. I was freaked out because I guess you could say that I could be considered a target due to my LGBT status. So I decided to send some friends a Snapchat of what was going on, to let them know that some freaky stuff was happening. People kept telling me to call the police, but I felt weird doing that just because someone was ringing my doorbell. Eventually the people went away and that was it, or so I thought. When my neighbor came home, I let her know what happened. She told me that if anything like that happened again, to give her a call and she'd have her boyfriend come over. He's huge and works at a gym, so he looks very intimidating. I already had her number, so I didn't need to ask for it. All was well. Fast forward to later that night at around midnight. I was sitting on the couch in just my underwear watching TV. My dogs were being annoying with their barking, so I shut them in the room upstairs and turned up my TV so that I wouldn't have to deal with it. My couch is facing the wall where the front door and windows are, because the only space to put our TV was above the fireplace. The window by the stairs didn't have a curtain up because it had fallen at some point, and I never got around to putting it back up. I wasn't really worried about it because it was tucked behind a corner, and you wouldn't be able to see unless you were right up against it. That combined with how secluded our neighborhood was, I wasn't worried about hanging out in my home in my underwear with the window uncovered. Midnight rolls around and my doorbell starts going off again, this time more crazy. Not knowing if somebody is or was peeking in at me, I booked it straight up towards a tiny first-floor bathroom and locked the door. Meanwhile, my dogs are still stuck in the room upstairs. I tried calling my neighbor, but I no longer had her number. I guess it didn't transfer over when I replaced my phone. So I called the police and they said they'd be sending someone immediately. In the meantime, I'm locked in a tiny bathroom. The TV is blasting, and the doorbell has been going off for several minutes. I had no way to protect myself if anyone broke in because I didn't grab anything. I just bolted into the bathroom. It's midnight. Nobody with a legitimate reason would be at my front door. At this point, it had been going on for about 8 minutes when I decided to record it once again. I tried to get better audio by cracking the door open a little since my TV was so loud, ready to slam the door close if I heard anyone. But at that point, the ringing just stopped. Turns out my neighbor woke up and heard the bells, so they went out to confront the people, and the people just booked it. They described the same 2 people I had seen earlier. 30 minutes later, the police finally arrive. I gave them my statement, and that was that. It never happened again after that. I moved a couple months later for unrelated reasons. Thanks for watching, guys. Please make sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe to join the Sinful Society if you haven't done so already. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be sure to email me your true scary stories. My email is in the info box below. Till we meet again, stay sinful.